Years ago I was a student using the GI Bill. I was older. Got a very nice work study as a security guard with the university. Most of the guards were older guys trying to get into the campus police force. Was told I would get an odd assignment because of my military background, the botany/biology department greenhouses complex. May. Okay. Was told to read the post instructions carefully and obey them. The complex was outside radio range, before cell phones, and only one phone in the complex would work at night. The gates to the complex were opened by remote. If the gates were open, I was to leave and call the police from a truck stop miles away. If I saw anyone on the grounds as I drove in, I was to leave and call the police from the truck stop. All doors were to be shut and locked. I was to drive the car up to a side door where I could see the alarm panel. If and only if the panel confirmed all doors were shut and locked could I go in. Otherwise, leave and call the police. If the panel was all green, I was to park the patrol car so it blocked the side entrance. It was recessed, lock the other car doors, get out, unlock the side door, lock and close the car door I had left, enter and reset the alarm. If I saw anyone at any time, I was to leave immediately and get to the car and call the cops from the truck stop. I thought the instructions were weird, but whatever. The rest of the instructions said I was to call the office every even hour from the one phone, pretty common. Since they did all sorts of experiments, if a greenhouse had a sign on it, I was to not enter it. I was to not leave the building except to flee or at the end of my shift. No one except the police or guards I personally knew or from the group could be let in. This place on a 10-hour shift from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m. Friday to Sunday nights. The place is big and sprawling with dozens of greenhouses connected by doors or almost tunnels in a sort of maze. Only the roofs are clear glass, the sides are this odd translucent plastic stuff you can almost see through. Also has a research office/lab building that is fucking freaky as hell. All sorts of machines humming and clicking, and all the east-west corridors have mirrors at the end, so as I walk around I keep catching movement out of the corner of my eye. Luckily I just have to check the labs at the very beginning and end to make sure the rooms are locked and lock them if they are not. Rest of the time I am just supposed to wander around the greenhouses and make sure there are no fires or leaks. In the middle of the greenhouses is a big geodesic dome heated greenhouse. It is amazing. It has trees, grass, flowers, a little waterfall and pond water feature. There are a few birds that got inside there, a couple frogs, and even crickets. By the third week I am in the habit of eating my lunch sitting by the little pond. I remember very clearly the third weekend it started snowing, hard, and I sat in the dome eating a chicken salad sandwich watching the snow as I listened to crickets. I had no idea why the instructions were so grim/extreme. The next weekend, though, something happened. I finished my shift, got my stuff together, and set the alarm so I had 2 minutes to leave. I left, shut the locked door, unlocked the car, got in, etc. just like the instructions, and started to leave. As I backed up I saw tracks in the snow. It was still pretty dark and the lights from the exterior weren't the best, but it looked like footprints in the snow. Like someone had walked around the outside of the car trying to get past it to the door. I looked around but didn't see anyone. The tracks looked like they came from the edge of the fence, straight to the car, back and forth 10 or 12 times, then off to circle the greenhouses. The light was bad, but the footprints looked like they were of bare feet. I got the hell out of there. By the time I got to the truck stop, though, I had calmed down and figured, I hadn't actually seen anyone. And with the gate closed, etc., it might have just been my supervisor checking to see if I was doing my job right. I didn't want the hassle of the cops, but when I got to the office I told my supervisor and the manager what I had seen and explained why I didn't call. They were real still, asked if I was okay, and told me that if it happened again I was to call the cops. Couple days later my supervisor calls me on a day off and asks me to grab a beer with him, workplace bonding. Sure. Meet him that evening, have a few beers. He is obviously here for serious business. I'm worried I am being downsized or something. Finally he starts to tell me the story about botany, what we call the location. About 12 years before the uni stopped letting people work in the building after dark. Insurance reasons, they said. The rumor was people kept seeing and hearing odd things at night. After a huge leak the uni put security in the building full time about 8 years before. Then 6 years before a guard vanished. Now, guys who work in security quit by not showing up all the time. And sometimes they quit by just leaving work. But they don't leave behind the car that got them there and their stuff in the building, usually. The new guard talked about hearing noises outside, and tapping on windows, and footprints in the snow. Then he quit because he wouldn't go back. Then 2 years later another guard vanished, left behind the patrol car, his keys, and a wife. The uni didn't want to spend the money for 2 guards and it was so far away that the supervisors couldn't visit all the time, so they came up with strict rules. The new guards would last a month or 2, then the tapping and noises and stuff would scare them off. Then 2 years before I started, a guard died. He was found outside one of the emergency exits, seemingly beaten to death. They figure he was new, heard the noises, and went to check it out. Since then they had rotated guys through a few weeks at a time, but everyone who knew the story thought botany was a punishment assignment. But for 2 years no one had seen or heard odd things. So when I started, a combat vet, they figured they'd put me out there. Then I saw footprints. He was so serious I didn't have the heart to ask if he was foosing with me, so I called other guys from the office. They all knew the story, all swore it was true. Some talked about seeing shadows through the greenhouse walls, or hearing tapping at the windows of the lab offices as they walked past, or finding their stuff moved that they left behind when they patrolled. So I called the work-study office and took a different position. Fast forward 5 years, I've got my degree. Having lunch when boom, my old supervisor walks in. He's a cop, now, with the city, not the uni. I say hi, we catch up a little. After about 10 minutes apologize for quitting with no notice. He got real still. Said it was okay, they hired a new guy right away and they only patrolled botany for about 2 more months, then the uni decided to not patrol it anymore. They just installed a bunch of machinery to shut off the water if there was a leak. Said I should have stayed. No, Anons. They installed all that stuff for a reason. We put the new guy out there on botany. The 3rd weekend he didn't come back to the office, so we went out there. The alarms were still on, the car was parked where it was supposed to be, everything looked like it should. But he wasn't there. All we found was his lunch in the dome, by the pond. I got a story, been meaning to post this one for a while. This is back around 2006, early summer. I was just your typical 17-year-old kid. Parents moved around a lot back in those days, but we always ended up living beside large forests, woods, or prairie places. Done plenty of exploring, with and without friends. Ton of stories, but there's always one which makes you look back on with no definite answer in sight, no matter which way you look at it. But this is how it went down. Played a lot of vidya, and watched a lot of TV. Taps was big in these days. People respected them then, so you can see I was really taken by the whole let's go ghost hunting trend. Near my house there's this big urban forest, kind of like NY Park, split into 3 parts, Forest 1, 2, 3. Through the years, I had a couple strange unexplained events happen to me in them. Phantom smells, lavender, roses, simply faded away as quick as they came. At night, in Forest 2, which had a concrete foundation where probably a house once stood, me and a few friends would see brief bright flashes of light just erupt over our heads with nothing ever there for miles, too close down for planes. It actually lit up the ground around us like if it were a hovering camera flash. Of course, now that I look back on it, it might have been a hunter's camera gadget strapped to a tree or something. One's guess. Then there was Forest 3, which had a cemetery in it. Caught a ton of EVPs there, chilling ones. Most notable one, I asked, is there a heaven, a hell, why don't you call for God? And a young woman replied to me in a sad tone. There is no God. So there was some freaky stuff going on there. One day I woke up early in the morning, 4:30 a.m. between 5. I recently bought this cheap $70 digital camera from Walmart and was extremely bored with it. So I figured an early walk in the forest should provide me with some unique pictures, which they did if you want to see them. Probably not. But they're all from this day. And we'll post some, so I set out doing the same thing I've done probably 100 tons by now. I'm walking down the streets and after a couple blocks hit the forest entrance, and dive in, and I dive in deep into her. I spend the next 15 minutes just heading to some known places I know would give me some good snapshots, so I take a quickie snap here. And another quickie snap here, thinking to myself, this is gold, son. All the while forgetting, the whole entire wood is empty, silent, desolate as I had ever seen it before. I usually run into 1 or 2 people by now, either jogging or walking their mutts, but nothing. It's a good day, I say to myself, let's carry on. So I head to this area called the safe zone. It's simply called that on account that it's wide, Expansive with a little sand dune and a tall tree smack down in the middle of it, so if you're under that tree, you can pretty much see all paths that string together Forest 1. I'm there, so I decide, let's bam it to the lake. I pick a path from the safe zone and head for it. It is at this time I sense an eerie feeling in the air, like I'm being watched. I ignored it, because at that age I wasn't mature enough to that point where everyone learns to trust your gut, feelings, internal ringing alarm bell, whatever, stayed calm and carried. I hit the lake. I'm tired from walking like 45 minutes of miles. Sun was out but casting gray skies with a sudden in and out drizzle between instances. I perk myself against the ledge underneath the cover of some trees and with a low battery on my camera just decide to hang out while staring bluntly out at this lake that, be my recollection, wasn't swamped by a heavy fog or mist not 5 minutes ago. First time I seen the place like this, I tell myself. Then my eyes caught it from the distance. I'm frozen. I see a person draped in this loose sheet, what looked to be a black tarp, just simply spinning. Spinning, and spinning around in circles in a pond bush of dogtails. His or her arms open widely as if praising something repeatedly. I'm simply there being as quiet as I can be, not moving an inch, barely releasing a breath observing this mad person. This goes on for about 25 seconds until the spin comes to an abrupt stop. I stare wide-eyed with thoughts racing in my head. What's going on? What the fuck is this? Should I? I'm thinking to myself, you got a camera. Don't be one of those idiots who don't capture the shit they so desperately brag about years from now on. Low battery, bars practically invisible, cheap ass Walmart brand. Don't die on me. I reach for it and look up. And find him looking in my direction. I tell you, I saw no face. It was white, gray, whatever, like a doll. Was it a mask? I don't know, but I was terrified that I was discovered, pinpointed out from my cover. It was far from me but it still managed to see me in like 4 seconds. So I stare slack jaw. Slowly lifting up my camera. In that moment he or it lifts one white arm out of its tarp and points at him. Just pointing at me from a distance, as if doing some ritual jest, then his arm drops slowly down. You know that scene from Shaun of the Dead where Shaun pushes the zombie chick onto the steel pole and she gets up, while Ed rotates the film reel on his camera? That's what I did. I lifted my camera up. Snap, another one. Snap, battery officially dead. Then I got up, slowly backed away and ran all the way back to the safe zone, and out a dozen trails and paths, crisscrossing to my exit. That was a crazy ass day I must say. 2 revealment pics coming up. Be me. U.S. Marine, stationed in Okinawa, Japan. For those of you who don't know, Okinawa is an island south of Japan literally covered in U.S. military bases. Be stationed on the smallest MC base on island, sleepy little base called Camp Courtney. Get put on a temporary base security detail, get a job as corporal of the guard, basically just sit in a little guard shack with an office and a TV watching a radio, and if anything goes wrong you go take care of it. Quiet Thursday night on duty. Hissing rain, sucking wind, thunder, lightning, etc. Get a call from a sentry on post about a young girl dressed as a walking into the jungle by the gate. WFT.exe. Immediately assumed it's something weird, duh. Get Moo Beretta, pepper spray, flashlight, radio, etc. It's raining even harder. Walk to area where this girl was spotted. I should explain that Okinawa was where the final, and one of the bloodiest, battles of World War II took place, and hundreds if not thousands of civilians were killed, so I already assumed it was a ghost or some shit. Get to gate. Fucking soaked. Talk to the sentry about what he saw. Man, it was a short local girl in white. She looked like a nurse. She went down that trail along the gate. Already knew that the trail led to these tombs. For those of you who aren't familiar, in Japan there are these big tombs everywhere, and it's extremely disrespectful to trespass. People say you'll be cursed and haunted if you do. There are some tombs on base that are off limits to all except family. There are signs that say off limits by order of the commanding general and everything. Well, that's not good. Walk up to path, shine flashlight into brush. Nothing. Cry out, ask if anyone's there. No one. Tired, wet, and a little spooked, so I just say fuck it and go back because it's probably a fucking ghost anyway lol. Tell the guy it was probably a cat or something. There are wild cats all over Okinawa. Yeah fucking right lol. 2 hours later. Sentry relieved, different guy at the gate. Sentry radios, tells me he saw someone walking into the brush again. God damn it. It's like 2 AM, windier than before, still fucking pouring. The guy had no idea about what happened earlier. Go check it out again. Ask the sentry if it looked like a nurse. Yeah. Okay, at this point I'm a little more curious, so I tell myself I'll actually go in this time. Get up there, cry out, still no one. Step over some bushes and go into the jungle. Immediate regret, but decide to keep going. It's so fucking dark, flashlight just makes it creepier. Remember that there are a lot of snakes this time of year lol, also big ass banana spiders. Ready scared. Tell myself I will keep going until I see the sign. They're big red and yellow signs, you can't miss them. It's a lot darker in the woods but also seemed a lot quieter. I think the rain must have died down a little. Trail is going back a lot further than I remember. Sign should have been back there, I can't even see out of the jungle at this point. I'm so far back I can barely tell if I'm on the trail or not. I'm fucking lost. Really starting to freak out. Tactical pause, take a deep breath, tell myself to stay calm. I could be getting shot at, things could be worse after. Hear a soft moaning cry. Sends chills down my spine, stricken with fear. Ask if anyone is there, it gets louder. Keeps getting louder, seems like it's getting closer. Feel presence walk immediately behind me. Say f this, walk away from crying and whatever was behind me, which is further into the jungle. In for or retarded. Feels like I'm walking on a hard surface instead of mud and standing water. Turn on flashlight. It's cobblestone, you're f***ing with me. Look around a little more. I'm within 20 feet of a giant tomb. Please whoever is buried here forgive me, I'm lost. Crying is still same distance from me as it was before, like it's following me. Stand there because I don't know what to do. Frozen with fear, crying is getting closer. All of a sudden.
Cobb, this is Echo 3 Alpha, radio check, over.
Jump 30 feet in air and scream a little, as well as shit self. Radio went off loud as fuck. Roger Lima Charlie. Out. Put radio away. As I'm putting it down I notice the crying stopped. Look back up. Nurse girl is standing there at the foot of the tomb looking at me. Sends a million chills down my spine, more scared than ever. She's a short Japanese girl, must be early mid-teens. Pale as snow. Instantly turn around and run out of there. Keep running until I finally get out of the jungle. Completely different area than where I came in. Make it back to the shack, soaking wet, super spooked. Next day I tell everyone. Guy who has been on island forever says he's seen this nurse before, same with some of his buddies. Ever since my lights in my room will turn off at random knocks on window, no one there, things will get knocked over etc. Still live here, still haunted AF. One day my lights turned off, my roommate and I both saw a black figure, first reaction was to take a picture. Pic related. Feel nauseous and get goosebumps every time I look at it. No, it's not fake. I swear to God I never believed in any of you guys here until I started reading these stories and suddenly made some connections. I swear to God this is all true. I live in Pennsylvania just outside the city of Reading. There's a lot of thick forests around here but nothing ridiculous and it's mostly suburbs where I am. Farther out it's highways and farmland. Lucky for me I live right up at the edge of a small community at the very top of a hill. The forest is literally across the street from me. Anyway, somewhere around a year or two ago my dad and I were outside having a personal chat about some recent tough events going on in my house when suddenly we heard a weird sound in the forest across the road. We both stopped and looked over. I didn't think deer came out this late, I think I said. My dad just stared and looked kinda confused. Then suddenly we heard someone yell something like help, I'm bleeding. We both sat there staring into the woods where it came from. My dad stood up and said to get inside. We both rushed in and I watched him run upstairs to grab his handgun. My dad's a rough sort of guy and always heads for his gun if he thinks something's going down. Something was definitely fucking going down. I opened our back door again to our deck, it was a glass door, and peeked back out towards the forest to see if anyone would come sprinting out or something. Keep in mind we're at the edge of the suburbs and not exactly used to hearing people scream bloody murder in the middle of the night. Then I heard it. This loud, weird screech. It was like a cat or a woman but it definitely wasn't human. It was weird, like it was high-pitched but not, and filled the entire neighborhood for a full 10 seconds before it suddenly went silent. I slammed the glass door shut and ran to the stairs just in time to see my dad stomping down in boots with his pistol. "Did you hear that?" I remember asking him. He just nodded and we both head out the front. By now a bunch of our neighbors were coming outside too. The scream was really fucking loud, but I didn't even expect all these people to come out this late. It was almost midnight. My dad went down to the street and looked up at the forest. Another guy came up to my dad and he had some kind of handgun too. I watched them start chatting for a bit until suddenly another one of those screams pierced the air again. It was horrible and made me feel sick to my stomach. It went on for something like another 10 seconds and just suddenly cut off. Like fucking idiots, my dad and this random neighbor guy decide to point their guns towards the forest and head in. I couldn't believe it. I mean, my dad is a hunter and he's been doing it since he was a kid. He's almost 40, but I'd be damned if I'd do something like that. They must have been in the forest for a good 20 minutes together, searching the darkness for God knows what. I sat outside with a bunch of neighbors that entire time, staring into the forest and waiting. Can't. Eventually they came back just fine. They stuck together the entire time according to my dad and thought they saw something like a tall guy in the forest at some point. When they tried to see if he was the one screaming, apparently he got on all fours and hauled ass into the forest. We all were pretty shaken up but parted ways and head back to our houses. That was pretty fucking weird and no police or anything ever checked it out, but eventually we all moved past it. A long while after that there was a separate incident that I didn't exactly connect to the first. Later that year I was sitting outside with my friend on my back porch. We were talking and having a grand old time dicking around when I saw my cat Jinx pawing at my glass window. "What a stupid cat," my friend said. I agreed with him and played with the cat, putting my finger on the window while he pawed at my finger wherever it went. That's not what's weird though. Later that night I was in my room playing a game with my window open. My cat was somewhere in the house, along with all our dogs, so I know he was fine. It's important to note that my neighborhood has a real problem with stray cats though. Anyway, I was sitting there playing some games with my window open when I heard what sounded like a cat meowing outside. I paused my game, wondering if Jinx had gotten outside, and went to my window to listen. I heard that meow again, but it was a long, deep one, that kind you hear from a cat when they're pissed and backed in a corner with their claws out. I recognized it wasn't my cat, but it was still coming from the woods behind my house, so I stared into them and tried to see where the stray was at and what it was getting so pissy at. The cat did that deep, long, angry meow again, and it sounded sorta close to my actual yard. I heard some shuffling in the woods and then something weird happened. I thought I could hear someone talking. Except it wasn't like a normal person's voice. It was like some mentally unstable person trying to mimic someone else really badly. It was something like Psychopath cat. Immediately I got creeped out, but, seeing as how my window was on the second floor, I felt fairly safe to keep listening. Then I realized the voice was changing. Stupid cat. It clicked. It sounded like something trying to sound like my friend but doing really, really badly. Then there was a serious scuffle. I heard twigs breaking and the cat just going apeshit. I mean, it was really screeching and meowing like it was fighting for life or death. Then there was this loud thumping sound. It was like something big and heavy smacking against something else solid. After that the meowing stopped completely and whatever was out there went dead silent. I was pretty creeped out by this point and I shut my window and had real trouble sleeping that night. Nothing's really happened since, aside from one incident where I was getting a drink late one night and thought I saw someone crouching really super low on my back porch and looking into my glass door. Like I saw light reflect off their eyes, like when you see an animal at night or something. The door was locked and it really freaked me right the fuck out and made me sprint to my room and wake up my dad, but he didn't find anyone or anything, and I've been assuming it was just me being scared from all these stories on /x/. Now that I've read all these stories, I'm freaking the fuck out. I've never seen one about something even remotely close to these things happening around my area, but now I'm freaking the fuck out. That shit was literally in my backyard. But yeah, that's all I got. Reposted from an old /v/thread. I used to know what you might call that kid in middle school. He always smelled like he shit himself and wore the same clothes for fucking weeks on end. That is, his wardrobe consisted exclusively of real run-of-the-mill, generic pajamas. The kind where it's a completely solid color, the shirt buttons up and has a pocket for some reason, and there's a matching pair of pants. He wore that to school and he wouldn't take the fuckers off until they were fucking made of stains and smelled so bad that he actually noticed. He was your typical chubby, long-haired greasy neckbeard, except it was the 7th grade and he couldn't grow facial hair. Actually, that's not entirely true, he grew a really fucking weird, thin mustache that was composed of only the barest number of hairs. But his upper lip always looked wet, so you couldn't help but notice that it was there. Anyways, he liked to bill himself as a video game programmer. The truth was he could only program terrible-ass text adventures in Visual Basic, and it was a damn miracle if they last more than 3 minutes and weren't easy as shit. He brought these fucking retarded games into school every other week, burned to blank CD-ROMs, and he'd ask everyone to play them in the computer lab. They were always really retarded. You're completely predictable, you wake up in a dark cell or an alien spaceship or in a forest kind of deal. Except for one he brought, and that was different. That's not to say it was actually good, or even really an actual fucking game, to be frank, just that it stood out among his other releases. This one, he called Happy Mommy. And I'm the sorry sack of shit he insisted should play it. It started out in the usual command prompt window his games always had, with the pointless ass beginning text asking me to type go to begin the game. Except this time when I typed go, it didn't start out in typical text adventure style telling me I woke up somewhere and there's a useful item in the room and 4 directions. This time, it started out saying happy mommy one day gone, just like that, in all lowercase, as was standard fare in this fucking weirdo's dumbass games. I wasn't really sure what the fuck to do at this point, so I asked him and he told me to type in mommy. So that's what I did, and it returned happy mommy 2 day gone. Again, just like that, the S missing after day and everything. I didn't really know what else to do, so I typed in mommy again. This time I got happy mommy 3 day gone. Now, I tried to type mommy again, but it didn't work this time, so I asked him what the hell I'm supposed to do now, and he said to type feel good. So I did, and I got happy mommy 4 day gone. Happy mommy feel good. Happy mommy feel good. And then it just closed itself. I went on with the rest of my day, completely fucking confused at what the shit he made me play. He came to school the next day, and that is the last time I ever saw him. Really spooky ending, I guess. The whole class was obviously wondering what happened to him, and all the teachers made it seem real mysterious and creepy because they were real insistent that we don't talk fucking about it. No one found out what the hell happened for the rest of our entire school, from 8th grade to high school graduation, outside of the obviously bullshit rumors. Years later, long after I was a grown adult, I came back into contact with one of my middle school teachers and we chatted up a bit about the good old days and all the retarded assholes that went to my middle school. I guess because I was an adult he felt more comfortable around me, even if he was still way older than me, so I asked him what the hell ever happened to that kid. Now, this next part, I swear to God, is not made up. Apparently, over the week before he disappeared, this kid's mom had fucking herself. And since he was an only child and she was raising him on her own, and no one in their neighborhood really knew them, no one fucking knew about it, and the kid just kept going to school and coming home to her corpse for 5 days before someone took notice of this and looked into it. And, according to this particular teacher, this kid, I shit you the fuck not, had been fucking his mom's corpse almost the entire time. I was never actually told what happened to him after Child Protective Services took him away, and I'm not sure anyone knows. B15. Parents threw me out of the house at midnight for finding drugs in my room. Like hey give a fuck.mp4. Pack my backpack and get a sleeping bag, it's summer so sleeping outside is no problem. Find a lonely spot in the industrial part of town, put sleeping bag down on the edge of the parking lot that borders the building, cozy little alcove. Go to sleep, bit spooky being so alone and quiet, but fall asleep. Wake up to hear liquid pattering down onto my sleeping bag. Rain Man. Wait, I'm in the alcove, how can it be raining on me? Poke head out of sleeping bag, some guy pissing on me. What the fuck are you doing? Yell at him for being a creep, get out of the sleeping bag to kick his ass. He runs off like a goddamn Kenyan. Fucking piss soaked sleeping bag, goddammit. Wait, this doesn't smell like piss. It was lighter fluid. OC my 18th birthday party. October. Live out in the country in Tennessee. Dark as all kinds of fuck. Perfect chilly weather. Around 25 people all gathered at my house. We're playing Manhunt. One guy runs off into woods. Everyone else waits an hour, then hunts him with paintball guns. Plan on multiple rounds through the night. Couple rounds go by, no big deal. My 10-year-old brother draws short straw. Almost didn't let him go hide, but he begged. What could happen? We tried to find him for 6 hours. Eventually find him terrified in a hunter perch thing in a tree. Friend who found him said he kicked him in the face and almost knocked him off the tree at first. I ask him why. He tells me that he heard me trying to find him below the perch hours earlier. He peeks out. Sit back in. It isn't fucking me. It isn't a fucking person. It stayed below the tree calling his name for a few hours. Ran off when it hurt us coming to actually find him. WTF guys. Have this dream. In a factory. Typical wacky dream shit going on. Go through the back door of the factory. Walk out into a sort of Disney cartoon. A bit like in Who Framed Roger Rabbit when Valiant is in Toontown. Don't like it. Has this weird sort of opera/choir kind of music in the background. But it's really foreboding and eerie. Whole place feels foreboding and eerie. Start panicking. See phone booth. Use phone booth. Call myself to come rescue myself. Wake up sweating. Time to get up anyway. Go downstairs. See I have message on answering machine. Play message. It's the same music from the dream and someone talking but you can't make out what's being said. Message was received just before I woke up. Maybe I called my house phone with my mobile while I was sleeping like some kind of muscle memory thing. Although that wouldn't explain the background music. Remember my mobile was downstairs charging the whole night anyway. Link related, it's the voicemail. TL, doctor I called myself from a dream I think. This is a story from my friend's dad. The dad works as maintenance guy for multiple office buildings in NJ. There's one specific building in this area that multiple employees refuse to work at because of the creepy shit that happens there. Dad is working at the building, his friend is working nearby and he says he'll meet up with dad after work. Dad describes the friend as this no-nonsense lawyer, doesn't believe in supernatural shit, he's Muslim. It's night time and the friend is waiting for dad outside the building, they're going to get something to eat. Short old hooded lady standing by the bus stop. Approaches them, dad says it's hard to see her face because of the lighting and her hood, starts rambling about some holy stuff, the Bible etc. Dad turns to his friend, said friend is sprinting down the street. Chases him down, catches up asking WTF was that about? You didn't notice? That lady had no feet. She was floating. Friend is shaken up by it for the rest of the night, refuses to go to that area ever again. The way the dad told the story was better than I can type it. Might not be the spookiest, but he has more stories of creepy stuff happening to him and other employees that worked at the building before. Someone go to the office park and explore the building's PLS. Small town airport and on here again. Another story of weird stuff happening, I'm only observed part of this. Pre-COVID, 2019-2020, renovations getting done to various stories in prep for increased tourists, lol. Our store is in line with 2 others that need rewiring, airport paying for it. Access point is the convenience store to our left. Keep in mind that the walls in this place aren't very thick, you can always hear people bumping around in back rooms. Late shift, not my normal, regular girl is sick. Working with older dude, doesn't get spooked easily hence why we have him out here at night. Electrician supposed to be working throughout the night, currently on smoko. Hey mate I'm gonna go take a piss. I make my way over to the toilets. Suddenly every single light in the area goes out for like 4 seconds, emergency ones boot up. Stop and look around with rest of terminal staff and few passengers, nobody knows what's up. Start making my way back, see all of the electricians gathered outside convenience store, arguing saying they don't know what's happening / won't go up to check out what the fault is. Head electrician reluctantly goes up, I check on coworker at store. Says he hears lots of bumping and angry voices, but from inside the walls, and up in the roof. He figured it was a workplace argument. Tell him that literally every worker was outside the access point. WTH Anon. We peek out to see the electricians, head guy comes back and simply says get security. Whole terminal is evacuated for like 2 hours, all flights delayed. Like many of the stories that happen here there's probably a completely rational explanation, but none of the workers knew what was going on, and we were never told what happened. Security simply refused to talk about it, and the few I'm friendly said they don't know who got called to deal with it. Work in manufacturing. The TL, doctor is we dunked metal wire into a near boiling curing agent via a crane more or less. Had brief conversation about the Super Bowl with coworker who's been on this part of the line the past 2 years. He turns back and just stares into the vat. Hey next block's coming up Paul. He just shoves his hands right into the vat. I'm paralyzed with shock. What seems like forever but probably only a second or two. He looks over to me with a blank expression. He realizes what happened, I guess. Starts screaming in horror and pain as I pull him back. Calls to the void. Not even once. Not my story, something a Native American guy posted a while ago, but it's some of the creepiest shit I've ever heard. My dad picks me up from school in his pickup truck after he got off work one winter's night. We were driving on a long stretch of road that goes through the woods. It's pitch black outside. The truck radio didn't work, so I was just sitting staring straight out at the road getting hypnotized by the passing trees. Suddenly started to get an intense sensation that something is watching me through the window to my right. I started to turn my head to see what it is when my dad yells, "Don't look." Immediately start to hear tapping on the window right next to my face. Heart stops. Only time I ever saw fear on my dad's face. He started to pray loudly in Navajo. Stare straight ahead, heart pounding, not daring to look out the window. Suddenly the truck dips as a weight falls into the bed. Whatever the fuck this thing is in the back right behind my head. Start to hear tapping on the window behind me. My father makes me look at him as he continues to pray. Close my eyes tight and wish for it to be over. After a few endless minutes the truck dips again and the tapping stops. My father says, "Tomorrow we will ask your grandfather to say a prayer so the evil will forget our faces," English to Navajo equivalent. Drive home and lie awake in bed all night. Father and I never talk about it again.
The following information is now almost impossible to find due to media blackouts and censorship efforts launched by the British government. I am able to relay it purely because I had taken copious notes in a loose-leaf notebook and was prepared to flee my residence within minutes of deeming it necessary. The events described below have been heavily investigated by members of an online community that is no longer in existence and have been confirmed by multiple sources. In most instances, the sources of the information were postings on social media websites. These postings rarely stayed up for more than an hour, and after the first day of the event, were likely being removed automatically by programs presumably set up by the government. In cases where the source was different, I have specified its origin. Numerous details surrounding this story have been left out, due to a lack of multiple sources. On July 27, 2013, at around 11 a.m., a large portion of the Cairngorms Nation Park in Scotland was cordoned off by the British military. The consensus is that the epicenter of this containment effort was a small patch of forest, 2.3 miles southwest of Bainbridge Mountain, at the coordinates 57.032697, 3.579004. The first sign that this was taking place was when a man walking his dogs through the park saw a military transport helicopter flying above the tree canopy. 15 minutes later, a couple out for a hike spotted British soldiers moving through a patch of forest some distance from them. They described the troops as fast-moving, heavily armed, and with their faces concealed. The soldiers did not notice the couple, and appeared focused on the woods. Around 11:30 a.m., British soldiers began actively and aggressively remove people from the park. The removal efforts were well outside of the epicenter of containment, suggesting that the British military was evacuating as many people from the park as possible. Soldiers driving battery-powered all-terrain vehicles, silent except for the sound of their tires rolling over the forest floor, picked up any civilians they saw. The civilians were then driven out of the park. The soldiers explained nothing, except that a training mission was in progress and that they were being evacuated for their safety. Civilians being driven out set the soldiers, clutching their weapons and staring into the forest, looked unusually guarded for a training mission. The reason for the containment, as it is now known with a considerable degree of certainty, was the presence of a humanoid entity within the forest. The first civilian sighting of this entity was made by a woman who had been bird-watching with a land telescope from the face of Ben Avon Mountain. She saw a transport helicopter land in a field a mile or two from the base of the mountain, then saw troops get out of the helicopter and move to the forest. Later, the woman was scanning the tree lines of the surround forest when she, by chance, spotted what she described as a naked, pale-skinned person. The person moved bizarrely with a kind of over-exaggerated upright posture and with very slow and smooth body movements. Specific details of the entity's physical appearance were impossible to make out due to the distance. She reported that the thing eventually disappeared into the woods. The second sighting was on the bank of a small river called the Derry Burn. Two older men were walking to a fishing spot when they spotted a red-faced thing in the woods on the other side of the river. They said it looked like a person with white skin wearing a mask made of red jade. The thing was staring at the bark of a tree, perfectly still, and with childlike curiosity. The men watched it for some time, keeping quiet as possible. At some point the entity became aware of them. It rotated its head towards them in a manner that unsettled the two men. They described it as like a head on a rotating plate, all the while keeping its body still. For the brief few seconds the men were staring face to face with the entity. Both remarked that as soon as the entity looked at them, they were overwhelmed by the stench of burning plastic. They quickly dropped their fishing equipment and ran. These men did not describe their encounter on social media. Rather, they went to a bar they frequented and told it to the bartender there, who then posted the story in the miscellaneous forum of bodybuilding.com, in a thread that grew to 8 pages in 20 hours. Like I said earlier, there was a group investigating all this. But this group did not exist in the first few days, per se. There were people posting in threads on different forums, and there were curious people here and there digging up what they could, but none of us had come together yet and actually organized. One of the guys who eventually became a member of this group had a friend in the Royal Air Force. He had known this friend long before the park was locked down. This friend, a few days after the lockdown took place, relayed him a story. The friend and his fellow RAF personnel were ordered, the same day the forest was locked down, to clear the runway they were stationed at, in order to host aircraft coming in from different bases. Military jets landed throughout the day to refuel, with no markings indicating their base of origin. The pilots flying them were described by airbase personnel as cold and untalkative, and they rarely left their cockpits. The purpose of these aircraft became apparent in the evening, when the RAF began bombing areas of the park. The bombings were not acknowledged by the government and were not reported by any media source. I know I sound crazy claiming this. Much of the information on the bombings comes from a thread on jeepforum.com, strangely enough. Off-road enthusiasts with jeeps had been in the area when everything started. These folks had encountered British troops earlier in the day and were told to leave the area immediately, which they did. However, they stuck around near the edge of the park, hoping to witness something exciting. They saw nothing, but at around 7 p.m., they heard what sounded like a deep clap of thunder off in the distance. There were no clouds in the sky, so they thought the sound was suspicious. They drove to higher grounds in the hopes of seeing something, but saw only a hint of light smoke drifting over the trees far away. Nothing could be seen definitively due to the distance. A series of explosions were then heard around 7:20 p.m. An American tourist staying at a bed and breakfast in Kincraig, northwest of the epicenter, had been hiking along B970 when he heard it. It came from far off in the park. He described it as a series of rapid explosions. This same series of explosions was heard by a teenager who had been chopping wood in his backyard nearby. A few civilians contacted the authorities to find out if they had any information on the noises. They were told by police that what they heard was probably a mining excavation or a thunderstorm over the mountain. This despite everyone having reported cloudless skies throughout the day. Further calls to the authorities on the subject were ignored and the media made no effort to investigate the explosions. If this seems unlikely, remember that the British government is more than capable of orchestrating media blackouts, and has done so for things far more insignificant. The UK is also one of the most CCTV-watched countries on Earth, with 1 camera for every 11 people. The police can arrest you for appearing in public with someone they told you not to. The people in charge of the country are more than capable of suppressing information. Still, for the first few days, most of the internet communities discussing the event were safe, except for those on major social media websites. The day after all this happened, a no-fly zone was issued over the park. This declaration was not made public. It was only noticed when someone on jeepforum.com investigated the area using www.flyradar24.com and saw no flights coming within 10 miles of the place. One of the members on the forum called the Department for Transport and asked if a no-fly zone had been issued. He was smart enough to do this from a payphone, and with a subtle disguise on that would make identifying him on CCTV difficult. Upon mentioning the park in the no-fly zone, he was politely asked to remain on hold. He put the phone down, off the hook, and walked about a block away to observe the phone booth from a safe distance. His suspicions were vindicated a few minutes later, when 2 black unmarked cars pulled up to the payphone. He said intimidating-looking men, not wearing anything that would identify them as law enforcement, exited the vehicles and began approaching the payphone. He fled as soon as he saw them. We assumed that, whatever happened, could embarrass the British government if it was made public, but wasn't so serious that we were in danger for talking about it. The spottings of the red-faced person had been known to us, but we didn't take them seriously during the first few days. We all just assumed the whole thing was some political bullshit. Then, certain eyewitnesses to the events were quietly arrested. One or two of the arrests were described in local news sources, but for the most part, the arrests were inferred based on happenings on social media. In the few instances where the arrest was discussed in the news, it was stated that the individual was arrested for either possession of drugs or for committing undisclosed white-collar crimes. Profiles on sites such as Facebook and Twitter were also being deleted, not just of the folks arrested, but of their family members. Many of the arrests seemed strange given the nature of the people arrested. People, for example, were being arrested for large-scale drug possession, despite a history of absolutely no drug use according to their friends and family. Then the threads on jeepforum.com and bodybuilding.com both disappeared. Anyone attempting to revive the discussions was banned. Some of the major folks involved in the discussion managed to get in touch with each other, using email addresses that could be found on archived copies of the forums. With the help of a tech-savvy member, we eventually established a low-key, private forum to talk about what happened. Things were quiet for the next few months. We tried to work out what happened and find evidence supporting all the claims made. It was exciting, you know. One member of this community had a large real-life social network and was trying to find anyone who might have information on what happened. Somehow, he said it was through an acquaintance in a government office, he was put in contact with someone. The contact was out of the country and refused to reveal his location. The only communication he had with this individual was in the form of a single, long email that was sent from a cryptic email address. The story told in the email was far more bizarre than anything heard yet. However, it included explanations for many of the things observed, and minor aspects of the story were confirmed by our own research. The majority of the members of our group, after much internal debate, came to accept the story as true. This anonymous contact, who used the alias Brown, claimed that the military lockdown of Cairngorms National Park was due to an emergency in a clandestine, underground laboratory. Brown was a member of a two-man response team, sent by the military to investigate the emergency. Brown thought it was strange that only 2 men would be sent to investigate, and came up with, as he was being driven to the lab, 2 reasons why the military would do it. One was that the military knew there were no threats within the lab, and simply wanted to scout it with a small team. The other was that the military knew there was a major threat in the lab, and saw these 2 men as disposable. Upon entering the facility, he assumed a third option, that only 2 men were sent because the military planned on killing them afterwards, to keep the lab a secret. Brown described the lab as sleek and high-tech, with shiny blue-gray tiles covering the walls and floors. Most of the desks they encountered housed state-of-the-art computer technology. He said it looked like it was from 50 years in the future. The team was told to recover hard drives, files, and notebooks containing information on Project Centaur. The nature of the project was not explained. They were given a map that highlighted offices and labs worth investigating. They were also told to approach the lower levels of the lab with caution and assess the status of certain test subjects located there. The facility had been constructed such that wireless communication was impossible from within, so the men had to periodically check in by using hardlines accessible from communication rooms. This gave them the freedom to explore and discuss what they were seeing without anyone eavesdropping. The men were not greeted by anyone. A security room near the entrance was empty. They went in and found a lunch room where a sandwich sat half-eaten on a table. As they moved into the facility, they saw that the entire place was flashing red under the light of a silent emergency alarm. They encountered a body in an office off of the main hall. It was a lady in a chair who looked like a mannequin. Her legs were locked out as if the knee joints had been fused together. Her eyes were wide and looked leathery, like they had been boiled. Her face and lips were bright pink and appeared chemical burnt. The rest of her skin was a waxy gray and was charred in certain parts. Her veins had turned black and were easily visible under the skin. They noticed that she was still breathing. The topic of Mercy killing her came up, but it was decided against, after realizing that whatever did this to her might come back and find her with a bullet wound, and thus be alerted to the two men's presence. Brown said that in retrospect, it was weird that they both assumed some sort of thing had done it, rather than say, chemical exposure or radiation. For some reason, both men had assumed from the start that some kind of hostile thing was responsible for the lab state. As they explored further, they found dozens of bodies in a similar state. Some were breathing lightly, but many were dead. Some of the bodies had disfiguring burn marks on their face, like they had been burned with a clothes iron. On 2 occasions, they found a body that looked like it had been burned completely into stiff ash, all the way through, like a spent log in a fireplace. The 2 men headed deeper into the facility, collecting notebooks from offices and hard drives from computers. In the deepest layers of the facility, they found the test subjects they had been warned about. They were inside observation rooms, visible through thick glass windows. They were alive. Their faces were expressionless, and black except for their noses, which were red. Their eyes looked sealed shut. They were shambling around like animals that had just been hit by a car. At this point, the J. Brown and his co-worker abandoned all pretenses of professional coolness and began discussing freely what they were seeing. Both agreed that the government had crossed some kind of ethical line. They decided to read over the notebooks they had collected so far, to try and figure out what happened. They looked over the files they had taken. They only learned general information on Project Centaur, that it involved splicing human DNA with segments of artificial DNA that contain unnatural base pairs. Base pairs are what make up DNA. The 2 men decided that the main lab, at the deepest point of the facility, would likely contain more information. They made their way to the depths of the underground structure, where they found a large biomedical laboratory. As they explored the lab, they came across 2 vats, large enough to fit a standing person. Both vats were open. One had been fractured open, with glass shards sprawled on the floor in front, while the other had had its lid ripped off and thrown across the lab. They found no dead scientists. The floor, however, was covered in burn marks, and in certain parts melted, and one of the burn marks vaguely resembled the outline of a person. Additionally, both men noticed the lab was filled with the smell of burnt plastic. They gathered up notebooks from the laboratory. These contained far more detailed information on what had happened. In particular, a document resembling a grant proposal provided a solid backstory. With all the information they had, they were able to piece together the origins of the research being done. It began with a financial analyst working for the Bank of England, who started without any apparent reason to have hallucinogenic visions of a recurring pattern. He saw the pattern visually. It resembled what a person sees if they press on their closed eyes. He was experienced in mathematics and saw the details of these visions with unnatural clarity, and so was able to take these visions and express them numerically. He noticed that the pattern was composed of 4 repeating values, which, on a hunch, he believed correlated to the 2 base pairs of human DNA. When he compared his pattern to the human DNA sequence, he found that it matched certain key segments of the human genome, only slightly altered. His visions, in summary, were of altered fragments of human DNA. The results floored him. He began to analyze further. He found that when he incorporated the fragments into a complete genome, using generic human DNA from the Human Genome Project, the result was 98.7% human. Chimpanzee DNA, for reference, is about 98% human. This genome, however, was not closer to chimpanzees, it was more distant. It was, if you will excuse me for saying, different in the other direction. His visionary genome, in certain instances, contained base pairs that were not one of the 2 that exist in nature. They were unnatural base pairs. Unnatural base pairs had been synthesized in laboratories, but obviously never found in nature. His vision gave no indication as to which base pair was required, but he was convinced that God had contacted him and had given him the recipe for perfecting mankind. Finding the right combination, therefore, was inevitable. He approached biologists from different universities, professors working in the field of synthetic biology, and spared them nothing of his theories. At this point believed himself a prophet, and assumed any who heard him would instantly recognize the importance of his task and lend him their help. One of the professors contacted the authorities immediately after the man dropped by and left his office. He assumed he was mentally insane. The financial analyst was taken into police custody. Eventually he was subject to medical testing, where doctors found numerous small tumors in his occipital lobe. His employment at the Bank of England was terminated, and he was supposedly transported to a 24/7 medical facility to receive specialized care. The man's fate is unknown. The government, for whatever reason, began to research his work. Apparently they were as dumbfounded as the whole situation as anyone would be. They planned to introduce the described alterations into human DNA and observe what effects it had. Altering human DNA was, according to these documents, easy. Scientists could engineer a series of viruses to deliver the altered DNA to every cell in the human body. The only difficulty was deciding which unnatural base pairs to include. The government researchers had no leads, so they simply began trying different unnatural base pairs, hoping one would eventually work. They decided to test these viruses in living human subjects. The first few tests were catastrophic. Subjects who were injected with the cocktail began to suffer extreme reactions to the DNA-altering infection. Their bodies seemed to fall apart, skin blistered and sloughed off, lymphatic fluid leaked from every square inch of skin, organs failed in tandem. The initial test subjects all died within an hour of being injected. As the researchers experimented with different unnatural base pairs, they found formulations that kept subjects alive for longer. The subjects spotted in the observation room were created as a result of these formulations. In the most recent tests, the human subjects showed new changes. They suffered far less during the infection when compared to previous tests, and were described as having red faces rather than black ones as the previous subjects had. These were the test subjects that were missing from the person-sized vats. These two red-faced test subjects were being grown, or altered, or whatever, when the emergency happened. That was the last bit of information the two men were able to extract from the notebooks recovered in the lab. Curiously, one of the lab notebooks appeared to have had its last pages ripped out. With their mission complete, the two men headed out into the surface. The military took them into their possession, along with the materials they had found. The two men were separated. J. Brown was subject to a hostile interrogation. He said that he remained calm and disinterested throughout it, hoping that his interrogators would assume he was unaffected and uninterested in what he had seen. The interrogation process lasted nearly a day. Afterwards, Brown was moved to a high-security military base. He was not put in a jail cell, but he was blocked from communicating with anyone outside, and his movements about the base were restricted. Fortunately for Brown, someone at the base was familiar to him. It was a friend with whom he had served in Afghanistan. More importantly, Brown had saved this friend's life in Afghanistan. He called in the favor, and the friend obliged him by smuggling him out of the building during the night. Brown fled the British Isles, and then the Western world in general. When the story was relayed to our forum, no one believed it. Still, we didn't have much to keep ourselves busy with, so a handful of members took to investigating certain facts. The original email gave the actual name of the financial analyst from the Bank of England, the one who had the visions. It was decided that, as a good starting place, we would try and track down this individual and confirm his existence. Typing his name into a search engine yielded nothing noteworthy, so we got creative. It was assumed that since he was working at a prestigious financial institution, he likely was a talented student and had probably attended a high-ranking secondary school and university. If his existence had been wiped from the internet, which a lot of us assumed was the case, we could still contact someone he had gone to school with and get a confirmation from them. A list of potential schools was drawn up. We decided to look at secondary schools, since it's far too easy for someone to attend a university without being known to the wider student body. Secondary schools, on the other hand, almost everyone is at least somewhat aware of everyone else's existence. People began calling secondary schools on our short list. After a number of unsuccessful calls, someone called a day trader who had attended Warwick School and had a reputation for a talent in math. The day trader's voice lit up at the very mention of the financial analyst's name. They had indeed gone to school together, he confirmed, and the analyst had been a prodigious student with high accolades. The person who made the call considered it a success. Before he could end the call, though, the day trader said something else. He had been contacted by the police a few weeks ago. The police warned the day trader that someone may call in the future and ask about the financial analyst, and that if anyone does, he must deny having known him, and then contact the police immediately. This was a major breakthrough. It confirmed that the police were trying to suppress knowledge of the financial analyst, and thus gave some weight to the ridiculous story of the underground lab. At this point, most of us had accepted P. Brown's story as accurate. Earlier, I mentioned that I was only going to describe events that had been verified by reliable sources. I feel that at least mentioning some of the unverified claims is necessary. They have been discussed and debated and researched heavily on our forum, and even though their credibility had not been proven, the simple fact that people were whispering them on our forum affected all of our perception of the event. 2 stories in particular were considered nearly proven. The first one came from a man who had been biking through Cairngorms Park the day the event took place. There are a number of facts that give this story credibility, but it had its doubters due to the nature by which it was known. It was relayed to us by an otherwise trusted member of our forum, who said he read it on a post on the Jeep forums on the day that everything happened. Unfortunately, he had not taken any screen caps of the original post, and no evidence could be found in any archives. We had nothing but his word, which was enough for many, but not for all. The story is this: the biker claimed that as he was traveling down a trail, he was hit with the stench of burning plastic. He thought there was a fire somewhere, so he got off of his bike and looked around. Eventually he heard some rustling in the woods nearby. As he walked towards the source of the noise, he saw what he described as a group of deer lying on the forest floor, with their internal anatomy rearranged to make them bipedal. The deer, however, still seemingly had brains wired for quadrupedal motion, and thus could only flail around on the ground. The biker ran back to his bike as soon as he saw the deer, and pedaled off. He hadn't brought his phone, or any kind of camera with him, and so couldn't take pictures of what he had seen. This story almost definitely would have been considered canon, were it not for the fact that it was so unsubstantiated. The next story came from a man claiming to have been one of the soldiers who had evacuated the park. Not at all unbelievable, as there were a decent number of troops in the forest on that day, and it was likely some of them had loose lips. This man, however, made claims that had not been made anywhere else. Many in our group believed the story was made up. We were nearly split over it, and we killed many hours discussing it. I personally believe it is true. The soldier claimed that he was with 4 others, doing routine sweeps for civilians, when they spotted the test subject at the edge of a forest. The soldiers themselves were moving across a large grass field. The test subject was a few hundred yards away, and not facing them. It was looking to their 10 o'clock, with its back facing them at an angle. As they approached it, the subject turned its head and looked at them. Like in the story of the 2 old fishermen, the soldier claimed that as soon as it looked at them, they were overcome with the taste and stench of burning plastic. He described it as a person wearing a mask of red gemstone, with a sickly pale body that was almost see-through. The soldier was hit with a wave of intense fear, but forced himself to raise his weapon and approach the thing. They approached it slowly, without firing their weapons. After they about 50 yards, the thing turned its body towards them and started walking. As soon as that happened, all 5 men stopped without a word. The soldier claimed that he was overcome with the understanding that he was not to move under any circumstances. He said it was like the freeze reflex, but totally unbreakable. He had been hit with a strange conviction that he would be safe as long as he did not move. The thing continued to approach them. When it was within 100 yards, the soldier could see the details of its mask-like face. The eyes of it were closed, as was the mouth. The soldier said that at this point, he began to feel hotter, as if he were blushing and standing in front of an oven at the same time. Soon he had felt like red-hot wires were being threaded through his skin. The soldier was overcome with the knowledge that he would be safe, despite the heat, as long as he did not move. He was convinced that the damage was reversible, and that the way to reverse it was to not move. In retrospect, he realized this was ridiculous, and the heat was damaging his skin, and they all had burn marks after the encounter. The only reason he and his companions were alive was that the test subject got distracted when some animal ran through the woods behind it. The soldier heard the rustling, and presumably so did the test subject. It turned its head in a bizarre manner, like it was floating above its body, to look for the source of the noise. As soon as the thing looked away, some of the soldier's freeze reflex lifted. It was still intense, but he was able to raise his weapon. His companions did likewise, and one of them fired off a round of bullets. The thing fled into the woods, dashing over 100 yards in what seemed like less than a second. The soldiers radioed in what had happened. They were then picked up and brought to a base. There they were told that they had been exposed to an experimental deliriant, which had caused their hallucinations, the burning on their skin, and the sensation of being frozen. The soldier initially believed his superiors, despite having a suspicion about the whole thing. But he realized he had been lied to when he heard other accounts of the red-faced test subject. There are other unconfirmed stories, but there's a good chance they were simply made up. These two are the only that people really thought might be truthful. 2 weeks ago, the forum we had set up was shut down. As soon as I opened up the dead webpage, grabbed my emergency bag and left my apartment. I haven't gone back. Some of us more paranoid members had set up emergency communication plans we could use to stay in touch if something like this were to happen. I tried making a few calls and sending a few emails, but I got no response. I am trying to leave the British Isles. I plan to take a boat to continental Europe, then disappear in a former USSR country. I have no intention of continuing my involvement in this investigation. Good luck to anyone who wishes to continue where we left off.